so much to do, but I'm going to. Education is not all about testing, and it's not. I want you to carry a lot more from this class than what the test actually shows. And speaking of which, on my test, one of the things I do is at the very last page, it'll say, or I may have forgotten to put it down because I may have run out of room. What I want you to do is add, at least on this test, up to 3 additional statements of learning that you have learned from this class, specific statements of learning. Like, don't tell me you learned about ecology, because what does that tell me? Pretty much nothing. It doesn't even tell me what ecology is. So give me specific statements of information, things you studied that, you know, when you take a test and you study so hard on certain things and I didn't ask you anything about it, and it's like I said, I could have asked you 200 questions easily. Okay, so, no, but I'm not going to do that to you with 55 minutes. All right, so here's a chance where you, like, you're teaching, and so, like, you are actually making a statement, a specific fact that you're writing down. And in fact, what I've done, the answer sheet for the test, well, let's just do this. I like for you to be familiar and not freaked out when you get the test. This is the answer sheet. And there are 60 lines. And there are 60 questions. Sometimes I may have extra lines, but this one you will be answering on 60. Okay, and 56 questions are multiple choice, so you're just going to be putting letters, and I prefer that they be capital letters if at all possible, because it's easier for me to distinguish an A from a B or a C or from a D or whatever. I mean, you can put them anywhere on the line, but in the beginning of the line, it's easier for me to grade if, I don't know, if they're kind of well lined up, that's you can't. But also over here, statement of additional information. So I want you to write up to 3 additional statements of information. And if you don't do that, I'm going to whip you with a wet spaghetti. And you really, I mean, you're going to have also 10 minutes with your notebooks. Exactly 10 minutes. All right? But it has to be, here's the catch. It has to be a specific statement of information that you've learned from this section that's biology related. Like, don't say that I'm hard, or, you know, I'm not a part of the test, okay? Give me something specific that's education. It has to be something that's not been directly asked on the test. So if I've asked you directly what a biome is, don't tell me what a biome is. Okay, but you could tell me what a particular type of biome is if it's something that's not been asked. So as long as it's not been directly asked on the test, it could have been a disclaimer. It may not have been the answer, and that's fine. But you get the drift. The thing of it is, you need to do those 3. I'm going to be very disappointed if you don't. Because what happens is each one of those subtracts 1 wrong answer from your test. So why would you not want to do those? You want to make sure you do those. So you can think of it this way. If you get those 3 down, you can miss 3 on the test, and you still have a perfect score. Sounds good? Okay, so be sure to do those. Also, where do you put your name?
Amen.
Bottom right corner.
corner. Here's the test. Oh, I'm showing questions. So, anyway, you put it there, but also I'd like for you to, in case the answer sheet gets away from the test, also put your name on the back of the answer sheet as well. And what's going to happen is I'm going to tell you to go ahead and pull the answer sheet off so that it's easier for you to read the test and write your answers down. Don't take the time to write all your answers on this test. There is a, okay, just because these first few ones are selected test bank questions from the publisher, there are some really bad ones I could have picked, but I didn't pick them. I tried to be as reasonable as possible. We're not writing on those blanks. Everything goes on the answer sheet. Okay, so everything goes here that gets graded. When you come in, as soon as we can get in this room, we're going to get started because you're going to need every bit of time. There isn't anybody in here right afterwards, so we probably could stay a little longer. Yes?
I had a question. If I need extra time on a test, what do I do? Extra time limit? I mean, like...
Okay, I'll talk to you individually.
Okay. Yeah.
So you may be able to stay, I'm talking to the class in general, to stay maybe 5-10 minutes longer if you need to, as long as there's not somebody coming in here as a class, and I don't think there is. We know we can't get started any sooner because there is a class in here. But we will start right away, and I will want you to put everything away completely except your pen, pencil. I don't care what you take the test with, as long as I can read it. Pencils sometimes get a little light. Yes.
Are we going to have like a calculator for like Hardy Whiteberg?
Yes, I would have a calculator, because there, one you may be able to do in your head, but the other one you'll need a calculator for, I'm sure. Okay. So, yes, you may use a calculator. Any other questions about the test? So, it looks like this. All right. And this, it's on the back too, don't forget the back. And here. And here. And here. Those of you with photographic memories, you have an advantage in this. And here. I'm not trying to surprise you with anything. And because we weren't here on Wednesday, did you like the focus study?
Yeah, it was really helpful.
Yes, I would spend a lot of time in that focus study. Of course, you got your outlines, you've got anything we talked about in class. You might want to also go to the end of each of the chapters and reread the summary at the end of each chapter because they have key terminology. Okay? And put it together. Have in your mind when you come in here what each chapter is about so that you can kind of compartmentalize the information. So if you run into a question that has something to do with Hardy Weinberg, you know it has to do with evolution of populations. You know, and go from there. So any questions about the test? If we have time at the end, we will be reviewing a little bit. My goal today is going biomes and communities.
Are they going to be like an order of chapter, or are they just going to be everything?
What did I end up doing? You know what? I think for the most part it's in order. I had the option to do the opposite, but I think I kept it in order. I thought that might be an advantage under the circumstances. And there might be a few out of order, but for the most part they are. All right. I also, the handout that you just got today, hey, how are you? Good, I'm good. How are you doing? Oh, periodic tables and exactly what I would want to play with, yes. That's good. professor, Duane Morrell. He teaches a lot of the anatomy and physiology. Okay, according to the second page of Brooklyn's outline, it says biomes are major life zones characterized by vegetation type in terrestrial biomes, or by the physical environment in the aquatic biome. And your book does use aquatic to mean all water, whether it's fresh or salt water. Okay, let's just go over biomes a little bit. And I would have this to the side with you because this kind of shows you globally. There are exceptions, obviously, but globally where these different biomes are. And of course, Earth changes and climate can greatly affect. Climate changes can greatly affect the flora and fauna. The flora would be the plants, the fauna would be the animals. Out of all these are terrestrial biomes. These are on land. Okay, so except for the bottom part, it lists all the different aquatic biomes, but I didn't do any specifics for them. Tropical rainforest, desert, savanna, chaparral, temperate grassland, northern coniferous forest, temperate broadleaf deciduous forest, and tundra. Why is a temperate broadleaf deciduous forest in bold? It's what? Yes, it's the one we are. Yes, very good. And which one of those, if you look at, let's look at precipitation, rainfall, precipitation, whether it's snow, rain. Precipitation has a large effect upon the actual type of vegetation and the type of animal life that's there. And the predator-prey situation, which is part of the community issue in 54, which one has the highest rainfall of all those terrestrials? Can average be the highest? Which one? Olivia? I'm sorry, do you know? Yeah, it's tropical rainforest. And tropical rainforests have been very important to us, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, because there are a lot of drugs that actually come from plants or other products in tropical rainforests. That's good for us, it's bad for the tropical rainforest because there's a lot of harvesting that's been going on that's destroying the tropical rainforest. Which one of these has the most diversity of animal life? And probably plant life too. Tropical rainforest, okay. Now, in terms of, if we talk aquatic biomes, what do you think the most diverse aquatic, let's just say, the most diverse aquatic biome would be? The wetlands, in terms of vegetation, okay, let's talk about animal life. The what? Well, in the ocean, but what part of the ocean? Coral reefs, yes, the coral reefs. So I kind of think of the tropical rainforest, terrestrial coral reefs. The coral reefs are also being greatly affected by changes in temperature. Water temperature is increasing. You can read about that all the time. It seems in the news about different places. Increasing just a few degrees is enough to really throw things off. You say, oh, Is a coral really living? Okay, there's a coral animal inside. The coral, what you think of the coral is the calcium carbonate skeleton that is made. But the animal is a relative of the jellyfish, a real soft-bodied cnidarian, which we'll be studying, that has tentacles with stinging cells, nematocysts on the end, and they're like, their food comes in to their top part of the animal, and then there's a gastrovascular cavity, not real sophisticated at all. It's like second in the list from the bottom. In terms of sophistication, sponges are the least complex animals, and then coral. So here's a showing a coral with its tentacles retracted, and here it is where one's empty. And there's bleaching of the discoloration of the coral reefs, which are so beautiful, which a lot of that has to do with temperature changes, and temperature changes affecting the pH, and pH can affect a lot of things. So all environmentally, or appears, there's a lot of evidence to appear that climate changing is not good to the coral reefs. There's a lot of other animals which exist there around them. Okay, so the desert, and it tells you latitude-wise, which is if you've got the equator going this way, across from east to west, there are bands going east to west, up towards the north, and also up towards the south. The equator, of course, is the hottest, and so as you go north, you have cooler temperatures, and you're going to see changes in biomes. And this map I found is a really good one. The greens are kind of somewhat difficult to distinguish, but we're close to this dot, okay, in terms of Cincinnati, Ohio. In fact, I looked it up. I didn't know it. Near latitude 39.103, with the equator being 0, and the longitude going up and down 84.512. So this whole area here is temperate forest, and broadleaf, which means deciduous. Broadleaf leaves, think of the maple tree as one of what we call our climax species, that if you let our biome go, there's a tendency towards the climax, or the main species would be maple, as long as there aren't diseases, of course, like there are with the ash tree that are knocking out the ash and other things. So far, the maple's done pretty well, and there's so many different types of maples. Yes?
I remember writing about two biomes like kind of overlapping.
Yes.
So is that like the tropical rainforest and deciduous? Is that?
They can overlap, depending on.
It says that one includes Ohio. Deciduous includes Ohio, but we're tropical rainforest.
Right. The temperate forest, this is a tropical. Temperate means it's more mild. This is a tropical rainforest.
So are these not just separate rooms?
They are.
And we don't have to leave here, but
We don't live in a tropical rainforest, we live in temperate, broadleaf, or a deciduous forest. Deciduous forest. Deciduous means what? Fall in the fall. Okay. And whereas evergreens and pine cones, the conifers, which are the what I call taiga. The taiga is the coniferous forest, northern coniferous forest, taiga. northern latitudes broadband, it's above the deciduous forest. Okay, so you've got the tropical rainforest around the equator that extends up.
That is the idea.
Sorry, I turned too late. Glad you told me. You actually have tropical rainforests going up through Central America. We see,
We see nothing.
it didn't just go off on
Ooh.
The orangey part are savannas, which are grasslands with scattered trees. The grasslands like Kansas, Nebraska, and those areas are primarily grasslands. These have more trees down around the Gulf area. Notice Southern California is really a savanna, a tropical grassland. And you've got Northern California really, it's making it look, again, the greens are a little, it almost makes it look like a taiga, which is a coniferous forest. Here's the really interesting thing. And of course, the desert has the least amount of precipitation. And deserts are always hot, right? Daytime and nighttime?
Yeah, nighttime it gets really cold.
That is correct.
There's some cold deserts.
That's what?
There are cold deserts.
And there are cold deserts. Yes, there are cold deserts too. And by the way, there are tropical forests that are more dry too. There's a division if you really get into that. But I concentrated just on the more moist ones, tropical forests. Great diversity. Tundra is up the more northern above the taiga. And a tundra, the main thing about it is it has a layer of permafrost. Down several inches, that means that it's permanently frosted. It's permanently frozen. It stays that way all year. So would you expect to have any trees really growing there that have big root systems? Probably not, because it's hard to get through the permafrost. So you have a limitation of more low-bearing type of vegetation. The interesting part about all of this is that it's also vertically layering. If you go somewhere where there are mountains, you may have at the base of the mountain, you may have deciduous broadleaf trees, okay, and other vegetation. And then as you climb the mountain, you start going into the conifers, right? The big evergreen trees, the pine trees, the cedar trees, the hemlock trees, depending on where you are. Okay, and then you finally, if you get a big enough mountain, the trees stop. What is that called? The tree line. Okay, it's the area where the trees stop. Because it's up at such high altitude, it is so windy at the top, it is so cold, the trees don't make it above the tree line, and so then you have a tundra at the top of a mountain. So there's also vertical layering as well as latitudinal of these different biomes, and they all have characteristic vegetation and characteristic animals. Pretty cool, huh? And there's some good pictures in your book of that. It does a really good job. Let me just, in terms of the aquatic biomes, they do show illustrations in the textbook. You have your lakes, like Caesar's Creek, like East Fork Lake. They kind of have some characteristics that are common to lakes. You don't have a direct current that's constantly running like in a river, stream, and there are some organisms that can survive in a lake but can't survive in running water, like in creeks and things. There are wetlands, which wetlands, a lot of people go into actual wetland ecology. There can be a lot of diversity there as well. They have their issues. Streams and rivers, the Ohio River, the Miami River. Where does, the Ohio River dumps south into the, what other big river? Mississippi River. And where does the Mississippi River dump into? Gulf of Mexico. And that area where the freshwater rivers, which collect all the water coming off the hillsides and everywhere when it rains, mixes with the ocean coming into the Gulf of Mexico, you have an intermediate salt environment. These are called estuaries. And you have to be really well adapted to live in an estuary. And I'm talking about if you were other than a human. Okay, an animal other than human, or a plant even. Estuaries are very hard. Intertidal zones would be just what it sounds. You have an ocean environment, you have low tide, you have high tide. The area between low tide and high tide is the intertidal zone. There's a collection of animals that like to live in intertidal zones. There's the open ocean called the pelagic zone. We talked about the coral reefs, and the benthic zone, the bottom of the ocean shelf or the continental shelf. So benthic means deep. And do you think there's any light that gets down there? No, so you don't have any photosynthesizers there. But in the pelagic zone, you have a lot of you have an upper part being the photozone for photosynthesis for the phytoplankton, plant plankton microscopic, algae that do a lot of photosynthesis. And also zooplankton, which eat the phytoplankton, and other animals which eat the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. There's a big food chain in the ocean as well. Do you have any questions concerning the biomes? So now you have a greater appreciation. You drive through the country and you see these different biomes are passing through. And it's got listings of some sample animals and plants that live in those different biomes. Community ecology. A biological community is a group of populations of different species living in close enough proximity to interact. I got that off of Lauren's. So, Lauren, thank you for the outline, good detail. I just kind of added some symbols over here. Community interactions. Pluses mean it's that the individual is getting something positive out of it. Food, not harm. If there's a negative, it means that individual is being harmed, maybe not killed, but nourishment is being taken from it, has some negative effect to it. And if you use a zero, like in this commensalism down here, one species benefits with the other not affected at all, positive or negatively. The shark and the remora is one of those things that used to be given as an example. The shark does its thing. There's a remora fish that kind of hangs out around the mouth of the shark. And whenever the shark eats, the scraps from the shark fall, and the remora fish gets it. It doesn't really affect the shark, but the remora definitely gets benefited from the shark eating, and it doesn't eat it. Okay, so competition is an interaction that occurs when individuals of different species compete for resources. So this is all about competing for resources. Let me try to move something forward. It's gonna be better. Competition for resource that limits survival and reproduction of each species. There is, before I go into the specifics, let's go back down to B here. It says competitive exclusion. This is a premise that two species competing for the same resource cannot coexist permanently. Here's a key word. Coexist permanently in the same place. Right? It's called competitive exclusion. And resource partitioning down here in F, the differentiation in ecological niches that enable species to coexist in a community. Okay, hawks and owls. Top predators. Come in with their talons. Grab it, take off. And even small dogs, unfortunately. You have to be really careful. They eat the same types of things, you know, from mice to snakes to other rodents to anything that they prefer. You know, they do reptiles and they do mammals. So, how do they coexist in the same area, the same habitat? The habitat is the place where they live. The niche, by the way, or if you want to say niche, the niche or the niche is the role they play in the community in terms of whether they're a predator, whether they're a producer, whether they're a first level consumer, second level consumer, you know, where they are in like the trophic levels, which are the feeding levels of the food chain or the expansive web, food web. So, how did the owls and the hawks work this out? Go ahead.
Do something with owls are nocturnal.
Ah, yes. Owls are nocturnal and hawks are usually diurnal. And di means for day, during the day. So if you see a big bird and you can tell it's a predator bird, it's most likely, now there are sometimes exceptions. You know how we have freaky people sometimes. You can have sometimes freaky owls and hawks, but you know, it's typically during the daytime, it's probably, if it's active, it's probably a hawk. If it's at nighttime, it's probably an owl of some sort. And of course, there are different species of owls and hawks, but they take different times of the day. So it's resource partitioning. Okay, what are some of the other? Talking about right now are symbiotic relationships of how one associates with another. One species associates with a different species. It's symbiosis. Now, what type of symbiosis is it? And that's what we're defining now. And then parasitism is where, you know, one eats something, like the other one, the other one is definitely harmed, may lose its life, or it could be, we have internal and external parasites sometimes. We can have worms, or dogs can have worms inside. Those are endoparasites. They're getting their nourishment first before you do. You eat the food, but they get their nourishment first. If you were a parasite, yeah, of course I know some parents always think some kids are parasites, but anyway, not funny, not funny. If you were really a parasite, would you want to kill your host? No, but do you think some of these parasites really have big brains to think this through? No, they get carried away, and they can actually cause death, even though they just lost their food source. Or it could be an ectoparasite, like a leech or something that's attached to you, is attached to the outside. Mutualism and commensalism. Mutualism is the one I really like a lot. Both species benefit from the interaction. A lichen, L-I-C-H-E-N, which are those crusty blue, green, gray looking crusty things on the side of tree trunks and on the ground. Those are lichens, L-I-C-H-E-N-S. And they're a combination of an algae and a fungus. And they live together. The algae is photosynthetic because it has chlorophyll. And the fungus is not photosynthetic, it's heterotrophic. But it retains moisture for the photosynthetic algae and kind of protective, some protection. So they both live together in association as a true mutualistic situation. Also, I think there's at least one question on there about the different kingdoms of eukaryotes and whether or not they have cell walls and whether or not they're autotrophs or heterotrophs. Are we heterotrophs or autotrophs? We're heterotrophs. We eat other things. We don't make our own food. Just because you put your food together in a kitchen, you're not making food. You're starting with flour. You're starting with plants. All of our food source originally comes from plants, indirectly or directly. If we eat hamburger, we're eating the cow muscle, which the cow eats grass. Other big thing I wanted to make sure that you know is that each step of the food chain, and I think I may have the one that I marked down. Aha. I've written it up at the top. Please catch this. This is a very important ecological principle. It has a lot to do with feeding the world. At the plants are the producers. They're the autotrophs that make the original source of food. And that would include rice, corn, beans, all of that. And then an herbivore comes along and eats the grass. The transfer of energy from the plants to the herbivore, they only get 10% of the original energy that was in the producer. There's a loss of 90%. There's a lot of heat that's lost and all the metabolic chemical processes that occur. Okay, so, and then there's let's say there's a lion or something comes along and eats the herbivore. Well, you've lost another 90% of the energy that was in the herbivore, and you've got only 10% here. So in terms of the energy pyramid, and knowing this, if you have a large population of people, and you have to keep them alive and feed them, is it more efficient to feed the meat, or is it more efficient to feed the material?
Yeah.
you how many gallons of water it takes. It's what?
How many
Right. You have to have lush vegetation for them to eat, hay, grains, and then all the water it takes. I mean, gallons and gallons of water a day. And if you live in an area where that's not an abundant resource, and it costs more. And if you're a farmer, it costs a lot to feed these livestock. And people will complain about farmers probably making too much money. I mean, I hope nobody ever says that, because I know back when my dad was farming, we barely made it even most years. It was almost nothing gained. Today, though, the small-time farmer is usually just a hobby farmer. They're either huge farms, which have gone really high-tech, because it's almost unaffordable, particularly if you have to buy all this equipment, and we're renting equipment is really, I feel sorry for the agriculture industry because of all the restraints going on, and now the tariff situation and everything. So it's just not a real good situation. Anyway, read through this whole thing. Ecological succession is a process that occurs when a disturbed area, and a disturbance is a fire, is a tornado, is something that disturbs, that's really violent, and the whole environment changes. If you're going from bare ground, you're going to have primary succession of some forms of life coming back, small amounts of you'll have lichens, and you'll have mosses, things like that first. Secondary succession is where an existing community's been cleared by a disturbance and leaves the soil intact. The area may return to something like the original state. Nitrogen is a really important mineral that's needed, and legumes are like alfalfa, clover, soybeans. They have a root system where they have these nodules on their roots that they can take the nitrogen from the air, the N2 from the air, and they can convert it to nitrates, which is a usable form of nitrogen that plants can use. Whereas a lot of plants like corn, when they grow in an area of ground, they strip the nitrogen from the soil, thus the need for fertilizers, which also costs money to add fertilizers. Then you have the controversy about using chemicals, and the controversy about the fertilizers leaching off into bodies of water, which can cause algal blooms. Is it good to have an algal bloom, a big...
Oh, it's toxic.
It's toxic. Why is that? Because those algae are photosynthetic. You would think they would be producing lots of oxygen. Go ahead. Too much. Too much oxygen. Okay, and that's a good thought, because it would seem that way. But do those plants live forever? Do algae live forever? Yeah, and then they die, and then there are the detritus feeders, and there are decomposers in the bottom that have to break down the bodies of these. In order to do that, oxygen is usually necessary. So algal blooms are called eutrophication. Eutrophication is an algal bloom out of control. It's not good. You start seeing fish dying. You'll see other organisms dying. That's why people who really are managing ponds and lakes need to be on top of it. And there are different methods that can be used. Some are safe, others in terms of bringing the algae population back down. But it takes oxygen to break down the dead bodies of the algae that it dies. So it actually does not return as much oxygen to the body. Okay, you got a little intro to ecology. We got a little more ecology coming later in another unit. Do you think you have a lot you could write about in those three statements? Okay, I will have to say that most of the test questions are not direct facts. Most of them are knowledge, understanding, application, analysis that you have to think about. So when you run into a question and it kind of tricks you a little bit, you look at the keyword and you say, okay, what do I know about this? And then go through your choices and eliminate choices that you know couldn't be possible. And sometimes if you read through a test, you will find words and answers to some things that you've been looking for. So the test might be helpful for some questions. So look for those clues as you go through. Okay, I went ahead and gave you, if you did not print it out, at the back of the biome chart, I gave you the focused, detailed study. Okay, what I'd like to do with the remaining time, and if you want to stay a little bit later, it depends on if you have a class or not. If you have a class, you do that. But if you want to stay 5 or 10 minutes longer, we probably could do that if you want to review a little bit more. But okay, you ask, and let's have you all answer. How many of you have already figured out the answers to most of these questions or information? No, they're not really answers, but gotten some information. Where do you want to start? What did you look at that kind of blew, you had no idea what it's talking about? There's an evolution for exam focus review, and you can tell it's a little longer than the ecology. So, yes.
Number 6, I was trying to find like a specific example of
Homologous structures like the bones and the wings of the bird and other animals. Examples?
yeah.
Is that the
Okay.
one with like the whale comparison?
The whale and the
It's
bird.
The one with the whale and the bird comparison, the picture?
The whale comparison, right? Where the bones, there was a
That's the
picture.
mammal forelimb.
I'm sorry, what?
I think that's the mammal forelimb.
Yes, but the bones, because they're mammals, they have similar bones. There was a picture in the textbook that actually showed you those comparisons. So that would be a good example right there. The actual flippers of the flippers of the whale actually have structures that are homologous, but they're used for different functions. It's like that of the bird flying, even though they're somewhat similar structures. Perhaps that question's not worded. I would normally probably compare the bones in the mammals as being coming from similar structure because they had common ancestry. That's the main point of that one.
I have a question,
Yes.
for the second one on ocean. Would that be Wallace, or, I think Wallace is the other guy, or would that be first? Didn't Wallace publish first?
Wallace, I don't think he published first. I think he proposed it first, had shared it with Darwin,
And then Darwin sped up.
Darwin added it to his, so the answer to number 2 is Darwin. And the main point of why it's Darwin is supported and backed by evidence. I mean, really, you could say, well, Mark was the first person to propose a mechanism, even though it wasn't right. But Darwin was the first person to actually use evidence to back it up. Others? Yes? The important feature needed to permit a gene to be used as a molecular clock. Anybody have an idea? It needs to be a pretty constant gene that hasn't varied much over the years, that it stayed pretty much the same. And be what I would say to that. It stayed constant over time so that it could be measured.
But they use organisms that have short lifespan, like short generations.
They can.
I think the example we talked about was HIV.
Oh, HIV?
I think, was that the one? Or am I thinking of something else? And we talked about how at first, they think based on this, it really was around like in the 1930s.
We did mention that, yes, absolutely we did.
Or is that talking about a different subject?
And that was about the molecular clock. Which chapter was that? Trying to find where it was.
It's okay, I can look it up.
Molecular clock. You're right, it was HIV. Dating the origin of HIV, they used a molecular clock. But then it says, using a molecular clock is an approach for measuring the absolute time of evolutionary change based on the observation that some genes evolve at constant rates. So, in other words, they stay the same for a certain number of years, and then they usually evolve. They're a more constantly evolving gene. That's on page 3 of chapter 26. Outline. Okay, any others? Yes.
31.
31. Early 1960s taxonomy and what was used as criteria to increase the kingdoms. Is that the one? Yeah. They're what?
There was 2 of them, right?
Okay, there could be. What were you gonna say?
Well, is that when we were telling us there was only 2? You were either like trying to figure out or
Right, yeah, they had Monera, all the bacteria in one kingdom. And then they had like animals and plants together. And they threw everything in one of those. And then they finally separated it out to the 5 kingdom system. They still kept Monera together, that was before the domains. But they took fungi out, why? Out of the plants.
Because they're not autotrophs.
Right, they're not autotrophs. So the answer to that question is their mode of nutrition, how they get their food. Whether they're heterotrophic, eat other things, or whether they're autotrophic. And fungi use enzymes which dissolve their food and then they suck it out. So it's a heterotrophic situation. It's not making their own food. So the time is really up, so if you want to